Welcome back. This channel exists because of your support. Subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get into the story. The cackling laughter reached me before I touched the doorknob. Sharp, jagged, nothing like the easy warmth of my wife entertaining friends. This was the sound of ridicule, each peal edged with mockery. My stomach clenched. I was the joke somehow. I just didn't know the setup yet. I'd finished my workout early. The gym was more crowded than usual, so I'd headed home to our Towson house. As I approached the front door with my gym bag, I heard that laughter. It stopped me cold. I recognized Jennifer's voice among the others, but there was something in the tone that sent a warning through my entire body. This wasn't friendly conversation. This was performance, and I was the subject. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside, setting my gym bag down quietly by the entrance. The scene in my living room made everything clear. 6 women sat in a semicircle on our sectional sofa. Notebooks and pens lay scattered across the coffee table alongside wine glasses and printed documents. All of them were red-faced from laughing. Jennifer sat at the center, holding a stapled packet of papers, gesturing dramatically as she read. Whitney Carson had her laptop open, typing furiously. Melissa Huang bounced with enthusiasm. Christine Wolfe nodded with authority. Trish Sullivan hung on every word. Diana Frost sat back with a smirk, looking like a queen bee presiding over her hive. I stood in the doorway unnoticed for maybe 10 seconds. The notebooks weren't casual jottings. They were organized, detailed. Whitney's laptop showed a multi-page document with headers and bullet points. This wasn't spontaneous. This was systematic. Then I heard what Jennifer was saying. "And number 14, she announced between giggles, her voice bright with excitement. "He needs pre-approval for any purchases over $50, including birthday gifts for me." The group erupted. Diana actually slapped her knee like this was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. Melissa clapped her hands together. Whitney typed even faster, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Oh, make him submit receipts," Diana added, and they all laughed harder. "Yes," Melissa jumped in. "And he has to explain what each purchase is for, like a teenager asking for allowance." More laughter. They were building on each other's ideas, feeding off the energy, creating something that grew more elaborate with each contribution. Jennifer's face was glowing. Not with happiness, exactly. With validation. With the rush of being at the center of attention, of having an audience that approved of everything she said. I watched my wife transform into someone I didn't recognize. The woman I married had opinions of her own. She didn't need a committee to validate every thought. But here she was, playing ringleader to this circus, feeding off their approval like some kind of validation vampire. Diana noticed me first. "Oh look, speak of the devil," she said with that sharp-edged smirk of hers. The other women turned, and suddenly I was the center of attention. Not in a good way. More like a specimen under a microscope. The laughter continued for another beat, as if they couldn't quite bring themselves to stop. Jennifer's face lit up with excitement, not embarrassment. She waved the papers in the air like a trophy. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing you." She gestured for me to come closer. "Come here, honey. The girls and I have been working on something really fun." The way she said fun made something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. Crystal clear understanding of what was happening here. "We're making a comprehensive husband improvement program," she continued, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "You know, guidelines that would make marriages so much better." The way she said guidelines made my blood pressure spike. These weren't suggestions. These weren't discussions between equals. These were commands wrapped up in the pretty packaging of friendship and female empowerment. I walked closer to the coffee table, noting how they all watched me. They wanted a reaction. They expected me to either get angry and prove their point about men being unreasonable, or submit and validate their little power game. I gave them neither. I picked up one of the pages from the coffee table. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Partnership Optimization Protocol." Below that, a table of contents listed categories: financial management, social expectations, household responsibilities, personal development, appearance standards. "This is really comprehensive," I said, keeping my voice level and conversational. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." Jennifer beamed. She stood up, energized by what she interpreted as my interest. "We've been working on this for weeks. For meetings so far." About 8 hours total. She looked around at her friends for confirmation, and they all nodded proudly. It's based on research about successful relationships. Studies show that structure improves partnership satisfaction. Whitney jumped in, eager to explain. We've consulted multiple sources. Relationship blogs, psychology articles, even some management theory. Diana leaned forward. Think of it as an upgrade to your marriage, Ryan. Like updating to the premium version. They talked over each other, excited to share their creation. Each woman added her favorite part. I love the daily gratitude requirement. Melissa said. The performance reviews are genius, Christine added with her teacher voice. My favorite is the allowance system, Trish said quietly, though she looked less certain than the others. I sat down in the armchair near the doorway, settling in like I was genuinely interested. I'm curious about the thought process behind this. How long have you been working on it? Jennifer's confidence soared. She sat back down, clearly interpreting my calm response as acceptance, maybe even compliance. For meetings, like I said, we started brainstorming about a month ago. It just kind of grew from there. We'd mention something our husbands did that annoyed us, and someone would say there should be a rule about that. And then we'd actually write the rule. It became this amazing collaborative project. That's dedication, I said. Walking me through the whole thing would help me understand the scope of what you're proposing. Of course, Jennifer practically glowed. She shuffled through her papers. We've got 18 rules so far, and we're still brainstorming more. This is just version 1.0. I settled back in my chair, fascinated by the psychology unfolding in front of me. These women weren't just making jokes. They were serious. They genuinely believed they had the right to create a framework for controlling their husbands, and they were using each other to normalize it. I'd like to hear the complete list, I said. Start from the beginning. I want to understand the full framework. Jennifer cleared her throat and began reading. Rule 1. All major decisions require wife approval. Career changes, large purchases over $50, social commitments. Melissa jumped in. No more surprise guy trips. They laughed. Rule 2. Daily household tasks checklist with point system. Christine nodded. Finally, accountability. Rule 3. Mandatory date nights twice monthly, planned and paid by husband. Wife chooses the venue. Rule 4. Weekly appreciation speeches, minimum 3 minutes, detailing specific things the wife does. Melissa bounced. I made Brian start this already. Rule 5. Restricted contact with single male friends. All friendships require wife approval. Rule 6. No sports on TV when wife wants to watch something else. Exception for playoffs with advanced negotiation. Rule 7. Wife chooses outfits for social events. No more embarrassing fashion choices. Rule 8. Advance notice for plans. 48 hours for after work, 1 week for weekends. Rule 9. Hobby time earned by completing tasks first. Maximum 5 hours weekly. Rule 10. Weekly performance reviews every Sunday. Wife provides letter grade. Whitney clapped. This keeps everything on track. Jennifer continued through the remaining rules. Financial transparency with wife-controlled budgets. A no privileges week for poor performance that made everyone laugh knowingly. Social media monitoring with shared passwords. Required participation in wife's interests. Physical fitness requirements. Limited family contact without wife present. Mandatory couples activities before solo plans. And annual performance reviews with written improvement goals. And we're still brainstorming more. Jennifer announced. This is just version 1. We'll meet weekly to compare notes and refine based on implementation results. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. This is really comprehensive. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this. My tone was conversational, almost appreciative. Can I ask something, though? Of course, Jennifer said, practically glowing with pride. How exactly would you enforce these rules? I mean, what happens if someone doesn't comply? The question seemed to energize them even more. They started talking over each other, eager to share their enforcement strategies. Withholding privileges, Diana said. Public embarrassment, Whitney suggested. Financial consequences, Christine added. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And if he's really stubborn, we can always use social pressure. Get his friends' wives involved. Make it a community effort. There it was. The nuclear option. Turn the entire social circle into enforcers of their ridiculous rule system. Create a network of wives policing their husbands like some suburban surveillance state. That's brilliant, I said, and I meant it. Not because the plan was good, but because they'd just revealed exactly how far they were willing to go. How little they respected not just me, but any man in their orbit. Whitney looked up from her laptop. We should make copies for everyone. Start implementing these in our own marriages and see how it goes. Like a test group. Perfect idea. Jennifer agreed. We could meet weekly to compare notes. See which rules work best. Maybe add new ones based on our experiences. I sat there listening to them plan the systematic dismantling of their marriages, all while congratulating themselves on their brilliance. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. No concept of how their little experiment was about to backfire in ways they couldn't imagine. But I knew, because while they'd been busy creating their rulebook, I'd been formulating my own strategy. And unlike their elaborate system of micromanagement, mine was beautifully simple. One rule. That's all I needed. One rule that would expose the fundamental flaw in their entire philosophy and shut down their little power game permanently. Whitney clicked her pen with authority. I think we should present the complete list to him now. Get his official response. She looked directly at me with the kind of condescending smile you'd give a child about to receive instructions. Jennifer clapped her hands together. Perfect timing. Honey, we'd like to go through the entire implementation plan with you. Think of it as an orientation for your new and improved marriage. The other women giggled at this, clearly delighted with the phrasing. They arranged themselves like a tribunal, notebooks ready, pens poised to record my reactions. They expected compliance. Maybe some weak protests they could easily dismiss, followed by reluctant acceptance of their authority. I appreciate the effort, I said. Before we discuss implementation, I want to understand the framework. These rules apply specifically to husbands? That's right, Jennifer confirmed. Whitney added, men need more structure. It's just how they're wired. And wives implement the enforcement. They nodded. What about accountability on the other side? Any rules wives need to follow? Silence. Jennifer's smile wavered slightly. Diana spoke slowly. Wives naturally regulate themselves. We don't need external rules. So it's a one-way system, I said. Wives create rules, husbands follow them, no reciprocal structure. Right, Jennifer said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. How did you create these rules? Did you survey your husbands about what would improve your marriages? More silence. Trish finally said, we based them on our experiences. Your experiences, not your husband's experiences? Jennifer looked uncomfortable. This is about creating structure. I picked up their printed document. Implementation timeline, Monday, September 25th. Enforcement mechanisms include privilege revocation and social pressure. Consequences escalate with repeated violations. I looked at Whitney. This sounds like legislation, not suggestions. Jennifer's voice had forced patience. Why are you being so analytical? It's supposed to be helpful. I want to understand what you're proposing. Once we implement a system like this, it changes the fundamental nature of the relationship. The group was restless now. This wasn't how they'd expected this to go. We've put a lot of work into this, Jennifer said. The least you could do is listen with an open mind. Absolutely, I agreed. But if I'm going to be subject to 18 rules created without my input, I should be allowed to contribute one rule of my own. After all, if we're restructuring marriage dynamics, shouldn't it be collaborative? The room went quiet. They hadn't expected this. In their worldview, I was supposed to be a passive recipient of their wisdom, not an active participant in rulemaking. What kind of rule? Jennifer asked cautiously. I smiled. Not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. Just one simple rule that I think would make the whole system more balanced and fair. After all, if we're going to restructure marriage dynamics, shouldn't it be a collaborative effort? The trap was set. They could hardly refuse without admitting their system was designed to be one-sided and unfair. But agreeing to hear my rule meant opening the door to consequences they couldn't imagine. Jennifer looked around at her friends, seeking guidance from her support group. They were all watching me now with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Fine, she said finally. One rule. Then we go through our list. Perfect, I said. They had no idea they'd just agreed to their own demolition. I stood up slowly, taking my time, letting the anticipation build in the room. The women watched me with a mixture of curiosity and growing unease. They sensed something had shifted, but couldn't quite identify what. First, let me say how impressed I am with your dedication to improving marriages. I began, pacing slightly as I spoke. 18 Rules is thorough, really thorough. It shows you've given this serious thought. Jennifer preened slightly at the praise, though her friends looked more skeptical. They were starting to realize that my calm acceptance might not be the victory they'd assumed. My rule is much simpler than yours, I continued, stopping to face the group directly. Just one sentence, really. Easy to remember, easy to implement. Whitney had her pen ready, prepared to add my contribution to their master document. Go ahead, she said with barely concealed impatience. I clasped my hands behind my back. Any wife who participates in creating rules to control her husband is automatically declaring that she accepts the same treatment from her husband. Any rules he decides to create, any standards he decides to implement, any enforcement mechanisms he deems appropriate. The silence was immediate and complete. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. The smiles faded from their faces as the implications of what I'd just said began to sink in. What does that mean exactly? Jennifer asked, though her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. It means, I said, maintaining my conversational tone, that by establishing the principle that spouses can unilaterally create binding rules for each other, you've opened the door for reciprocal treatment. If it's acceptable for you to make rules for me, then it's acceptable for me to make rules for you. Whitney was shaking her head. That's not the same thing at all, isn't it? I asked genuinely. You just spent an hour explaining how husbands need structure and oversight, how they can't be trusted to make good decisions without guidance. Well, I'm applying that same logic to wives who think they have the authority to redesign other people's marriages without consultation. Jennifer's panic was starting to show. This was just a fun exercise. We weren't being serious. Really, I picked up their notebook and flipped through the pages of carefully written rules, complete with enforcement strategies and implementation timelines. This looks pretty serious to me. Multiple pages of detailed regulations, punishment systems, even plans for community enforcement. That's not the kind of thing people do for fun. Trish spoke up. We were just brainstorming. It wasn't meant to be taken literally. Interesting, I said, setting the notebook back down. Because when you were explaining how to withhold privileges and use social pressure to enforce compliance, it sounded very literal to me. I walked back to my chair, but didn't sit down. Instead, I leaned against it casually. Here's what I find fascinating, I continued. You all seem to think that creating rules for husbands was not only acceptable, but necessary. You were excited about it, energized by the idea of having that kind of control. But the moment I suggest the same approach might apply to you, suddenly it's unreasonable. The room was getting smaller by the second. These women who'd been so confident in their authority just minutes ago were now fidgeting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. So let me clarify my rule, I said, straightening up. Any woman who believes she has the right to create behavioral guidelines for her husband has automatically consented to having behavioral guidelines created for her. It's only fair, right? Equal treatment and all that. Jennifer found her voice, though it came out smaller than before. You can't be serious about this. Why not? I asked with genuine curiosity. You were serious about yours. You had 18 rules ready to implement, complete with consequences for noncompliance. You were planning to share this system with other wives, create a whole network of enforcement. That sounds pretty serious to me. Diana was staring at her hands. It's different when it's the other way around. How so? I pressed. Please, explain the difference. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you think rules and control are great ideas when you're the ones wielding the power, but suddenly become unfair when someone else might have that same power over you. No one had an answer for that. They couldn't explain why their authority was legitimate while mine was not, without admitting the whole thing was about dominance rather than improvement. I let the silence stretch for a moment before delivering the final piece of my strategy. Now, since we're all about fairness and structure, your husbands should have the opportunity to review this project. They should know their wives have been creating control systems. Don't you think they deserve transparency? I reached for my phone in my pocket. The panic was immediate. You wouldn't, Jennifer whispered. Watch me. I pulled out my phone. The reaction was electric. Whitney's voice climbed. You don't need to involve anyone else. You were talking about community enforcement, I said, scrolling through contacts. I'm just expanding the community to include the husbands. Jennifer half rose and lunged for my phone. Please don't. It'll ruin everything. I held it out of reach. I thought this was about improving marriages, unless they wouldn't see it as improvement. I found Derek Carson's contact and showed Whitney the screen. Let's start with Derek. He's analytical. I bet he'd appreciate this compliance tracking spreadsheet. No, Whitney practically shrieked. He'll think I'm crazy. Why? These are just helpful suggestions, right? I scrolled to Brian. What about Brian? He's in tech. I bet he'd appreciate the systematic approach, especially Rule 13 about social media monitoring. Melissa was hyperventilating. He can't find out about this. I moved through the contacts. Andrew the firefighter, Kevin the electrician, Gregory the lawyer. Each wife panicked at the mention of her husband's name. Stop. Diana finally broke. Fine. We get it. We were wrong. Just put the phone away. Maybe we should all just go home, Whitney said, heading for the door. Oh no, I said firmly. Whitney froze mid-step. We're not done. You all participated in creating this system. You need to understand why it was wrong and what the consequences could have been. Jennifer was crying now, mascara running. I'm sorry. I got carried away. I wanted to fit in. There it was. She'd been willing to humiliate me just to impress a group of women. Fit in, I repeated. You were willing to destroy your husband's dignity to fit in. Diana edged toward the door. Maybe we should go home. No, I said firmly. Sit down. You all need to understand why this was wrong. Whitney, who had half risen, sank back down. They sat reluctantly, looking like defendants awaiting sentences. I walked to the coffee table and set my phone face down on it where they could all see it. The threat was still present. Let me explain something about respect, I began. You can't legislate respect. You can't create rules that force someone to respect you. Respect is earned through your actions and lost through your choices. Whitney spoke quietly. We didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. You were excited about having control. You laughed about it. You planned enforcement. Don't pretend this was innocent. I picked up their master notebook from the coffee table and tore the first page. This stops today. Not just the notebook, but the entire mindset that created it. Another page. You're going to remember why you married your husbands. Not who you think they could become with proper management. Who they actually are. More pages scattered to the floor. Because your husbands aren't idiots. They would have figured out what was happening. And then you would have found out what it looks like when a man decides he's done with disrespect. They just leave. The silence was heavy with understanding. Jennifer, I said, you're going to make a choice right now? Continue thinking you know better than me about our marriage. Or remember that marriage is a partnership between equals. I choose partnership, she whispered. Good. Because the alternative was me choosing to find a partner who actually respected me. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Ladies, this has been educational, but I think it's time for you to go home and reflect on what you've learned today. They filed out quietly, most of them unable to look at me as they passed. Melissa was still crying. Christine was silent and shaken. Trish practically ran to her car. Diana was last, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but failing. Whitney paused at the door. Are you going to tell our husbands about this? She asked nervously. That depends, I said. Are you going to give me a reason to? She shook her head quickly and hurried out to her car. The house fell quiet after the last car pulled away. Jennifer stood slowly from where she'd been sitting, moving to the center of the now empty living room. She looked lost and ashamed. We stood there for a moment, the weight of what had happened settling between us. I'm sorry, she said finally. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking you could get away with disrespecting me because you had backup, I said calmly. You were thinking that as long as other people validated your behavior, it was acceptable. She nodded, tears starting again. How do we fix this? We fix it by you understanding that this marriage works because we respect each other, I said. The moment you decided I needed to be managed and controlled was the moment you stopped being my partner and started being my adversary. I walked over to where the torn pages lay scattered on the floor. Help me clean this up. And while we're doing it, you can explain to me how you're going to make sure something like this never happens again. We knelt together, picking up the pieces of their ridiculous rulebook. As we worked in silence, I realized this had been more than just shutting down a power grab. It had been a reminder of who I was and what I was willing to accept in my life. When we'd collected most of the pieces, Jennifer looked at the pile in her hands. Should I throw these away? She asked quietly. Not yet, I said. Keep them for a while, as a reminder of what happens when you prioritize the wrong things. She nodded. I'll put them somewhere I'll see them every day, until I'm sure I've learned the lesson. I stood and moved to the armchair, sitting down heavily. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Jennifer broke the silence from where she remained kneeling by the torn pages. I'll tell them I can't see them anymore. What will you tell them? I asked. That I chose my marriage over their approval. That what we were doing was wrong. I shook my head. You don't owe them explanations. You owe me accountability. Focus on us, not them. You're right, she said quietly. I've been focusing on them too much already. She gathered a handful of torn pages. I just wanted them to like me. They're all so confident and put together. I felt like I needed to contribute something to be part of the group. So you contributed your husband's dignity, I said. She flinched. I see that now. I saw it when you started asking questions. When I heard how it all sounded out loud. But I couldn't back down in front of them. So you chose them over me, I said. Chose their approval over my respect. Chose fitting in over our partnership. Yes, she whispered. And I'm so sorry. She stood slowly and moved to sit on the edge of the sofa, facing me. The distance between us felt both physical and emotional. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd married was still in there somewhere, underneath all that need for validation and approval. Do you understand what you were doing? I asked. You weren't just making jokes or venting. You were planning to implement this. To actually restructure our marriage without even discussing it with me first. I thought maybe you wouldn't mind, she said weakly. Maybe you'd see it as helpful. Helpful, I repeated. You thought I'd find it helpful to be put on an allowance? To have performance reviews? To need your permission for my own decisions? She was crying harder now. I don't know what I was thinking. It happened gradually. The first meeting was just fun girl talk. Then it became more serious. They made it sound so reasonable, like we were taking charge of our lives. You were taking charge, all right, I said. Of someone else's life. My life. Without my consent. I know, she said. And I'm sorry. I really am. I was quiet for a moment, considering. This marriage works because we respect each other, Jennifer. The moment you decided I needed to be managed and controlled was the moment you stopped being my partner and started being my adversary. Do you understand that? I do, she said. I understand. Tell me what you understand, I said. In your own words. Not what you think I want to hear. What you actually learned today. She took a moment to gather her thoughts. I understand that I betrayed your trust. That I was willing to humiliate you to impress people who probably don't even really care about me. I understand that I treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. She continued, her voice steadier now. I understand that a good marriage isn't about control. It's about partnership. About both people having equal say, equal respect. And I threw that away because I wanted to feel powerful. I nodded. That's a start. Now tell me how you're going to make sure this never happens again. I'm leaving the group, she said immediately. No more book club meetings. No more girls' nights with them. That's your choice to make, I said. But it's not enough. She looked confused. What else? What do you need from me? I need you to understand why you were vulnerable to this, I said. Why you needed their validation so badly that you'd sacrifice our marriage for it. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. I think I've been feeling lost. My job is fine, but it's not fulfilling. I don't really have many close friends. These women made me feel included. Important. Like I mattered. So you traded our partnership for their approval because you were lonely, I said. She nodded. I know that's not an excuse. But yes, that's what happened. We need to work on this, I said. Not through rules and control. Through actual communication. Through rebuilding the partnership we had. Can we do that? She asked. After what I did. That depends on you, I said. On whether you're willing to do the work. Real work, not performative changes. Can you do that? Yes, she said. I want to. I looked at her, at the woman I'd married 6 years ago. She was still in there, underneath the need for validation and approval. Whether she could find her way back remained to be seen. Some people think being a good husband means being accommodating to the point of self-destruction. Being agreeable, never making waves, accepting disrespect to keep the peace. But real strength isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about standing up for yourself when the people who should respect you most try to tear you down. Jennifer learned that lesson today. She learned that I have boundaries that can't be crossed, that I'm willing to defend my dignity even if it costs me my marriage. She learned that I'd rather be alone than be disrespected. And more importantly, I learned it too. I learned that I won't accept being treated as a project, as something to be managed and controlled. That I'd rather walk away than submit to someone else's idea of who I should be. Our marriage isn't fixed. One conversation doesn't undo the breach of trust. But we have a path forward now, based on honesty and mutual respect, not rules and control. Will Jennifer follow through? Will she do the work to understand why she needed their validation? Will she rebuild herself instead of trying to rebuild me? Time will tell. But one thing is certain. If she tries something like this again, if she ever again thinks she can control me, manage me, improve me, redesign me, there won't be a second conversation. There will just be an ending. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee while Jennifer stayed in the living room, sitting quietly with her thoughts. When the coffee was ready, I poured 2 cups and brought them back. We settled onto the sofa together as I handed her a cup. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up on us." "I didn't give up on us," I said. "I gave up on being disrespected. There's a difference." She nodded. "I know, and I'm grateful you showed me that difference." We sat together in silence, coffee cups between us, a quiet understanding settling over the room. This was a new beginning, maybe, or maybe just a temporary truce. Only time would tell. But I knew one thing for certain. Respect isn't about perfect agreement. It's not about never having conflict. It's about recognizing your partner's humanity, their autonomy, their dignity, and choosing to honor those things even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And that's a lesson worth fighting for. Dear listeners, that's our ending. If it resonated, subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.